If I'm talking fast, it's because I'm trying to leave a little time on Friday to answer any questions you guys have about the exam. William says no, don't leave any time. Okay, I won't.
No, yes, please leave time on Friday.
Microscopy. Okay, you guys took gym bio. I probably talked way too long about microscopy at the beginning of that lab. Wait, I have no idea what Dennis talked about.
Your video was really long.
You said it was really long?
Your video that you showed to the gym bio kids for lab.
You asked the microbiologist to talk about microscopes. What do you think was going to happen? I was going to be like, yeah, just go use it. Right? And they have no idea what they're doing. It was never going to happen. Right? So all that stuff, yeah, it's huge. I did gym bio 2 years ago. It's a lot of the same stuff. I honestly have no idea what this is. You were supposed to tell me. Apparently, you don't remember.
I need to show us a PowerPoint.
Excuse me?
I need to show us a PowerPoint. He's like, this is this is that, this is this. There you go.
Yeah. Well, this will be fun for you guys too. Right? Use of light or electrons to magnify objects. Right? You got to throw that electrons in there because we start getting into things like SEL. Right? Start talking about scanning electron microscopy, transmission electron microscopy. Right? You can't just restrict this to using light to magnify objects. And after you tell me, like, use of light to enlarge objects, it's like, really? It made it bigger? Maybe the appearance of it larger. It doesn't make the actual object bigger. See, I'm telling you, terminology. Don't think for a second that communication isn't a very large part of your job. Whatever it is you plan to do, leave here, because it is. You've got to communicate to other doctors and nurses, or you've got to communicate to people, grant funding panel. How you communicate is going to be important. General principles of microscopy. There are 4: wavelength of radiation, magnification, resolution, concentration. We're going to talk about each of these. Wavelength of radiation, we're talking about non-ionizing radiation. Traveling particles of energy. For the most part, we're talking about light. We're going to talk about these other parts where we're not talking about light. Right? Magnification, enlargement of that appearance. Resolution, be able to distinguish between 2 separate points. Right? Contrast, where we change the intensity. Right? So wavelength of radiation. Right? This is kind of tied to our resolving power. Right? We think of this traveling energy particle. Right? We're talking about wavelength. One, we may be talking about point to point on that wave. Sometimes people are talking about crest to trough as well. This is our wavelength. Right? Wavelength varies, right? Visible light, we're between this 400 nanometer and 700 nanometer, right? Versus radio, television waves, we may be like at 1 meter of light, right? What we're really talking about is how small can those structures be to disrupt wavelengths, right? This is why, do you guys even listen to regular radio anymore, or is everybody listening to satellite radio? Regular radio, start driving downtown, you start losing that signal. Excuse me? You say NPR?
Yeah.
I enjoy NPR. I enjoy NPR. Jade apparently does not enjoy NPR. I also enjoy audiobooks. Right, you drive downtown and all of a sudden you start losing that signal. Right, it's hard to lose the radio signal. You need something big and gigantic. That's because we're talking about these things being like 3 meter, wide, that wavelength. It's going to take a lot to disrupt that, right? But the smaller and smaller and smaller we get with that wavelength, the smaller and smaller the point that can disrupt it, right? It's the disruption of that wavelength that we're seeing with our magnification. So as we decrease the size of that wavelength, we're going to increase our resolving powers, right? So again, we think of resolution is being distinguished those 2 different points from each other. That smaller and smaller structures now can disrupt that wavelength, right? If I took a big giant flashlight and shined it, it'd be hard for me to block all of it with my hand if it's a big enough flashlight versus my laser pointer, right? Really easy to block that wavelength, right? Or maybe it's like, really easy to block that wavelength. The same thing is happening with the microscope. We're just talking about blocking that wavelength of light. We go from that visible light to using that UV light, right? We start now talking about like immunofluorescence. We can start getting smaller and seeing more detail because we can distinguish those 2 points now, because smaller points are now disrupting that wavelength. Versus we start getting into electron microscopy, right? We can increase that resolving power even more and distinguish between 2 points because that wavelength is getting even smaller. Again, even smaller points can now disrupt that wavelength. Right, so that magnification where we're increasing the appearance of that image, right, that's because of the refraction of light, right? That light is traveling and hitting a different density, right? And it's bending because of that. That bending of that light is that refraction. Right, this is my cheesy example. You guys are driving, trying to use Snapchat, right? And you veer off the side of the road and your tire hits that soft shoulder and your car just wants to like veer off, right? It's because that shoulder of the road is a different density, right, than the asphalt, so, than a pavement. So it's right, when that tire hits it, its speed's going to change and it's going to start to refract. It's going to start to bend over at an angle. And so it's that same thing, that our wavelength of energy is traveling and it hits that glass for our objective lens. It's going to be a property of that objective lens. It's going to cause it to refract, right? How much is literally a property of that lens and how we constructed it. It may cause it to bend more or less. Right? We pass that focal point and it's going to enlarge that image, right? The appearance of that image. Probably overdid it there. But this is all just saying what I just told you. Right? That refractive index, that measurement of how much you slope that light, how much you bend that light, is just a property of the lens. Right? We can get into a lot of technicalities on it. Somewhere I had a whole bunch where again I had overdone it. We're not going to do any math in here. But that's why we have to change objectives, right? Because it's a different lens, different property of that lens based on its aperture and the curvature of that lens, right? That's even why the working distance changed and how you guys broke slides when you tried to use that 40x objective lens and you drove it right to the slide. All that's a property of the lens. I don't know why you guys are acting like you do that, right? Resolution. You guys. Anybody here have a 4K TV?
I don't know.
Excuse me?
I don't know what that is.
You don't know what that is, really? Oh, okay.
I got a big one.
Thank you. 4K TV. Right, you're going to get one later, though, right?
I don't have one here.
Excuse me?
I don't have one here.
How many, but you're going to get one, right? Summer research. Right? Ooh, $4,000 or $5,000 stipend this summer. Go out and get that new TV when you get back. 1080p. High def. What's going on? No, help me out. High def. William, help me out. You have TV? Dory, TV. Yes, she had a TV. Okay, you had a TV, and then they tried to tell you this is better TV, buy that TV, and then later they're like, this is even better TV, you should buy this TV, right? What in the world is going on there? Right? They're trying to tell you about resolution. Right? What happened? Yeah. Yes. That's for the economics course. It will be after this one. About how they drive the market. I don't know. Right. When I was a kid, it was just 480p. Right. It was 480 lines of resolution, and then they sort of like high def, and it was 720 lines of resolution. I mean, they're like literally 720 lines. Right. That you could distinguish from one another on that screen, and that's why that was a sharper picture. And they were like, oh, it's true HD, true high def, and it was 1080p. Right, because now, it's 1,080 lines of resolution. Now they're trying to tell us, like, go buy this 4K TV. There's 4,000 lines resolution, right? And that's why that picture got sharper, is because instead of looking at, 1,080 lines of resolution, you're looking at 4,000, like literal, like lines. Excuse me? Just talking to myself. Right, but those lines are what you're distinguishing from one another, right? We're magnifying objects, we care about that resolution, because as we're magnifying, it doesn't matter if we made it really big or just big and blurry, right? We make it larger, we want it to be sharp, so we care about that resolution. So it's the same concept, whether we're talking about television or a microscope, we want to be able to distinguish as many different points as possible, right? And the more that we can do that, the sharper that image is, the bigger we can make that image and still get a quality image. Okay, so looking at the types of organisms, right? Unaided human eye, we can get down to about 200 micrometers, right? So large protozoa, we can see really, really large ones, right? Unaided, it's right at the limit of that. Right, things like individual cells from multicellular organism, right, these are going to be too small for us to see with the human eye. But compound light microscope is going to get us down to about 200 nanometers. So, right, those individual cells, these are about 10 micrometers big. We're going to see that. We're certainly going to be able to see, things that are 100 micrometers big. But we're going to start, we can see those bacteria as well. And we're going to be getting closer and closer to that limit. That bacteria, we're at 1 micrometer. Right, versus viruses, right, now we're down to 100 nanometers. Those are really, really large viruses, and you stained it properly and you knew what you were looking for, you'd be able to see it with a nice compound microscope, right? Don't worry, our ones here aren't that nice. Ours would probably get you to maybe right around 100 nanometers. Yeah, right around 100 nanometers. But again, I think you have to really know what you're looking for to appreciate those structures. By and large, they'd be so small that if you hadn't looked at that stuff a whole lot, it'd just be small stuff. Versus, we do something like scanning electron microscope, transmission electron microscope. Right now, we're getting down to 0.4 nanometers, 0.8 nanometers. Right, so now we're not talking about just being able to see viruses. Now we start talking about being able to see organelles. Right, now we start talking about being able to see individual amino acids. Right, may even be getting to talk about seeing individual atoms. Right, we'd have to have a really, really nice scanning electron microscope. UD, getting scanning electron microscope. Right now we have a loner. Do you remember what's our resolution? Do you know? Do you remember? Loner's gone. Our other one is supposed, they said like end of September or during October for the one that we're getting. Do you remember the resolution on that? I do not. Our resolution is higher than the loner we had. Yeah. I don't know. I'll have to ask.
Dr. Simon.
Yeah, I'll ask Dr. Simon. She's probably going to give us the most detail on it. I don't know if we're getting into, being able to see atoms. I doubt it. But the logo was pretty nice, so I'm excited. You guys should be excited. You guys should not be excited. University of Dallas, right? We got nice stuff, right? Heading all over the case, right? We get nice stuff. Please say here. Nice stuff?
Yeah.
I need to go. We have nice stuff now. Like, we have nice stuff now. All right. I'll forget it. Please don't go with our formulas or anything like that. I get excited sometimes. We'll save that for physics class. Now, the other part of that resolution are different things we can do to increase resolution. Oh my gosh, time's gone past quickly. Right. In lab, we're going to do oil immersion. Really, what that oil immersion is trying to increase the amount of light that enters into that objective lens. right? So we lose a lot of those lines of resolution to that refraction. Again, because of that change in density, that oil is going to help lessen that, so we collect more of that light. We're going to get more lines of resolution, right? So we're going to increase our resolving power, which means we're going to get a sharper image at that higher magnification, right? So slide, glass cover slip, because one of you is going to forget, and one of you is going to put the cover slip right down on the slide, and then put the oh, no, someone's going to make a sandwich. You're going to put the oil right here, and then you're going to put the cover slip on top of it. Every year. Right, refraction, you lose that light. It never gets collected by the objective lens, right? So you lose resolution. But here, that oil, right, we're hoping to keep that a more similar density, so you get more lines of resolution. They're going to contact that objective lens, right? So we're going to be able to get a sharper image, even at this higher magnification. At this point, I think this is dated now. You guys don't even know what I'm talking about. When Kindle came out, there was a commercial, and this guy's like sitting out by the pool trying to read his iPad, or he's seen it, and he's like, oh, you know, making all those cheesy faces, and the woman's just sitting there reading her Kindle. He's like, how can you see that in the sunlight? And she's like, the Kindle has blah, blah, blah contrast ratio, right? Never saw that commercial, right? That was their big selling point originally. Like, you can read it in the sunlight out by the pool and all these other locations. You know, on the iPad, you can increase their contrast ratio later. But, right, being able to distinguish between two separate points, right, between two objects, or between an object and its background, right. Hear about these things because microorganisms tend to be translucent. We start to care a lot about contrast. From microscopy, especially when looking at microorganisms, we apply contrast so we can distinguish an organism from the background. So this doesn't get washed out by that light source, or that energy source. Same thing when you're doing electron microscopy. You may use things like heavy metals to stain things, right? Because it's going to slow down the transmission of that electron as it passes through that object, right? So as an application, looks very different from the type of staining we're going to be doing in the lab. It's staining, right? Regardless of the type of microscopy, right, is being used to add contrast. All right, so we have our bright field microscopy, dark field, phase contrast, fluorescent microscopy, immunofluorescent, which is specialized type of fluorescent microscopy, confocal microscopy, right, all fall into light microscopy, and then electron microscopy, right, and we're getting smaller and smaller with our wavelengths, so we're getting increasing resolution, right, kind of as we go down. Right. So simple bright field microscopy, that's just a single lens. It's essentially just a magnifying glass. Versus compound microscopy, this is when we're using a series of lenses. Right, so even when you're in lab here, or even when you were in Gym Bio, it wasn't just that objective lens, it was also that ocular lens. That was your compound microscope, because that's now a lens system. Right. So you're passing it through that specimen into those objective lenses, and then into that ocular lens. Right? So total magnification is going to be your objective lens and your ocular lens. Right? Probably going to have some sort of condenser or something like that to intensify your light. Right? When we get to lab, we'll talk about microscope parts and all that. I'm just more interested in showing you that light path, right? Energy source. It doesn't matter what type of microscope it is. It's always the same, right? Energy source here is just a light bulb. Get real fancy in micro, we have nicer microscopes. It's going to be LED light. Right? Condenser lens to intensify that, pass through your specimen, hit that objective lens. Right? There usually is some sort of prism to kind of change that image towards the right orientation, and it's going to hit that ocular lens. Then you're just going to use your eyeball, but there's usually some sort of way that you have to visualize this. All right. Dark field microscopy. You're only going to scatter, you scatter light that hits the organisms. You only detect the light that hits that organism. Right? It'll make more sense. You give me a face. Right? Things that should appear light appear dark, things that should appear dark appear light. Right? As that light passes through the specimen, right? Unrefracted light, this is going to be a dark field stop or a stop plate here. It's going to cause that light to get bent and pass outside of that objective lens versus the light that actually refracts that specimen, this stop is going to cause it to actually get collected by the objective lens. Right? So things that would have been dark because that specimen was blocking it, that light actually can get collected, right? And things that would have been light because it just passed right by, that light's actually going to get blocked, right? So you end up with images like this, right? And that's that actual organism, right? So that's why it's dark field, because it's on this field of darkness. Works really, really well with living organisms, because you usually do this when you don't want to stain the organism. Like if we're going to look at a protozoa or something like that, we don't want to stain because we're going to damage it too much. You can use dark field and still get some contrast. This naturally fluoresces, that's why you see this green here. Normally it's just going to be black and white. Right, so bacteria look like, again, that field is more, right, we're getting that lightness or grounded that's coming from it. This is because it's unstained. Versus phase microscopes. Phase microscope is going to take things just a little out of phase. That light that hits that specimen and gets refracted, you're going to have what's just called a phase stop. It's going to take that light just a little bit more out of phase. So again, you're going to do this when you don't want to stain. And because it's unstained, it's going to make it a lot harder to see. So moving that light just a little bit out of phase is going to give you more definition around the images, or the edges. Right, so I don't know, when I look at this, it doesn't make any sense, and then I gotta like squint my eyes and do really hard. Just trying to show you these little wavelengths. And we look at these like, you know, press, drop, press, drop, right? Versus here, right, these are together, press, drop, press, drop. But it's trying to show you this phase plate, it's like this out of phase plate. Right, so this press is lining up with that trough. Right, so this is showing you what's happening here. Right, doesn't the specimen not refracted? Does the specimen just refracted a little bit because it ran into that pressure with this phase plate is going to take it out of even more phase. See how these aren't really in line with each other? This is going to take it even further out of line with each other. And what you're going to get are these kind of sharper edges. So these are all unstained, right? Bright field, if it was unstained, we're not getting good contrast. Versus dark field versus phase contrast. So again, it's going to let us look at specimens without staining them and just get a little bit more detail. Right? The sharpness around the edges is because that's where it's taken out of phase. Ooh, 1 minute. I'm going to speed through some stuff in 1 minute. We're going to come back. We're going to come back to this slide. I'm just trying to make sure that we have some time to talk about the exam. Okay. All right, fluorescent microscopy, we just went lower in resolution, and now we're getting to non-visible light. Really what you're doing is you're getting these little fluoroforms and exciting them, and then they're emitting a visible light. If you do immunofluorescence, you just use an antibody that has a fluoroform attached to it, and it binds to whatever it's specific for. So now it's even more specific, and you just have that particular thing, whereas, you know, same image, this is that immunofluorescence. That confocal where you start taking multiple planes, really, really fine focus, and you start stacking those on top of each other so you get like these three-dimensional images. Right? And if it's a nice enough computer, you can actually move this around on 3 different axes and look at it. Fluorescent microscopy? Yes, no, maybe.
Yeah. We haven't done this one, but I did read this.
We have not viewed this slide.
Okay.
Yes, we did that.
We did view it. You guys don't remember it. Right, so this is fluorescent microscopy, you're using UV. Right, because before with bright field microscopy, we're using visible light, where we moved beyond that range. I'm going to go way back. Right, now we're in this UV range for our wavelength. Right, so we've decreased that wavelength, so we've increased our resolving power. Right, the thing that's going on here, though, is that UV light, right? It's exciting a fluorophore, right? And then that's going to emit wavelength within that visible light spectrum, right? So that's how you end up actually seeing it. But you're using that UV light to accept it. One of the other ways you see this is immunofluorescence, right? Immunofluorescence, that fluorophore is conjugated to an antibody, right? And then that antibody binds to whatever that is. So, right, this may be specific for a specific pathogen, right? So then it binds to your organism, or it's going to be specific for a particular protein. It just happens to be in this cell wall, right? That UV light excites that fluorophore, and it's going to emit light within a visible wavelength, and now you can see that, right? Bright field microscopy versus the fluorescent microscopy, right? This is immunofluorescent. This is, right, 3 different antibodies, each with a different fluorophore, each being excited by a different wavelength of UV light and emitting a different wavelength back that you can see, right? So now we can, even though this is polymicrobial and there's lots of different microorganisms here, we can even start differentiating between the types of organisms in this preparation because they're fluorescing a different color. Okay, now one of the other things we can do is confocal microscopy. Confocal microscopy is still using UV light. Right, still causing, right, still exciting that fluorophore to emit that visible light. The difference here is, I'm looking for something that says pinhole aperture. There we go, pinhole aperture. This pinhole aperture. You guys do that weird thing when you were like looking in micro at your image, and it's like you could put it in focus, but there was always like a little bit of it out of focus, right? Because you were focusing on different planes. So you could get one plane really, really in focus, but if you had this part really in focus, this part of the bacteria was kind of out of focus, and this part down here was kind of out of focus. Right? This pinhole aperture just gives you one very, very thin plane. But the difference here is you're using a computer to do this optical sectioning where you're getting a picture of this plane, 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 right? All these different layers of these different axes. Each of them completely in focus, and then the computer stacks those focus layers on top of each other for you to get this 3-dimensional image. Right? So this is showing you that image, just immunofluorescence. This is showing you that image, immunofluorescence with this confocal microscope. Right? Because of the depth of this specimen, you could never really get this in focus because there was always a layer on top or below that was out of focus. Right? But again, with that optical sectioning, you can get, right, I'm talking about X, Y, and Z axis, right? You can get all those Z axes in focus and stack them on top of each other. Right? Again, you can't get that in focus. Now you get all those axes and you've layered them each in focus now on top of each other. Right? Here you're actually seeing in between this, because you went past just what you were seeing overhead, because you can get that 3 dimensions, right? So you're not just doing it on X and Y, you're also getting Z, but you're taking multiple X planes, multiple Z or Y planes, multiple Z planes, right? And putting all of that together, right? And you could actually take this whole thing and in the software for the microscope, move it around in all 3 dimensions, right, to look at it. That's kind of what they're showing you here. Is here they just kind of make this 3D reconstruction, but they're just trying to show you that depending on where you, right, they're looking at these 2 things interact, but depending on where you look at it, right, you can see it in a different way. And we're trying to look at a protein being processed by the Golgi body. We can really look at how it's trafficked within that cell, because we can look at it from the left of the Golgi body or the right, or we can look at it from up top of it or below, or from, one side of it or the other, right, without having to change anything because our microscope took all of those sections.
So we can like piece together different like physical sections of each one of the microscopes, or is it just like one section?
Well, it's not that what you put under it is taking all those layers. This is from the lab where I did get my PhD, right? We were doing confocal microscopy of biofilms. This is looking at different mutants, but we're literally looking at, exact same image, but you're able to take this and spin it around and look at it from the top and look at it from the bottom, because we were interested in how this biofilm was maturing, so we were interested in these polymer structures that it was forming. But if you can't do that just with just a regular microscope, because right, we can't look at it from the side, we can't look at it from the top, and then look at it from the bottom. Right? We were interested in looking, not only that, but this was staying for living and dead, so we can see like where the organisms were alive, where the organisms had died, all within this biofilm. Right? Same thing, kind of like looking at the health of that biofilm. So I think this is more towards your answer. Again, light path is the same, right? This is our light source here, but it gets refracted downward versus this our light source here. But right, we pass through our objective lens. Right, here's our pinhole aperture. It's like a prism layer detector versus your eyeball. So if your specimen is here, right, this was that focal plane. This is trying to show you below the focal plane. This is trying to show you above the focal plane. That's what was happening before, is you were always getting this out of focus and this out of focus. Versus here with this pinhole aperture, right, below is in red, above is in blue, is trying to show you that gets blocked by that pinhole aperture. So only this one focal plane that you have to focus makes it through to the detector. But this pinhole aperture is just going to keep shifting, so you get each and every plane. So same specimen, same image. You're just collecting all these different stacks that we just call stacks. You just collect all your different stacks.
So does that mean when you actually see it, it's always in good focus?
Yes. Right, and that's what was going on here. Okay. Right, you just took all those in-focus layers and then put them on top of each other, and that's why this came out so quick. Okay.
So is this something you look at like with your eyes? Like, do you actually use it in the lab, or is this more like you have a computer take all the pictures and put them together for that image?
You have to have the computer put all these together.
Okay.
Yeah, this is all on computer screen. You get like a preview, but it's that preview isn't really in 3D. You get your field of view lined up with that preview, and then you have it do it. And you're gonna need a lot of processing power for this. And then in that program for it, then you can kind of move it around and get the angles that you want.
Okay, that makes sense.
All right, electron microscopy, right, now we moved even further down that wavelength. All right, now we're not even talking about light, we're talking about electrons. 10,000 to 100,000, right? Now we're still looking at bacteria and viruses, but now we can get internal structures of them. We can start looking at macromolecules. We may start being able to look at molecules and even atoms. Right, it's going to depend on that particular electron microscope. First, we'll have a big giant picture. Keep going back, going. Not even that one. Keep going. There we go. All right, unedited eyeball, free unless you need some glasses. Compound light microscope. I don't know, you can get a cheap one off of Amazon for like $200, but it's not going to do you any good. Those, the Nikon E100, like we have in lab, we're probably talking about $1,200, right? And that's without doing like phase contrast and dark field, probably add like another $400, $500 when we stick that in there. Confocal microscope, probably getting that $300,000 range. You can get a cheap one for like $100,000. I don't think you want the $100,000 model. Scale electron microscope, transmission electron microscope. Inexpensive one, probably talking about $300,000. You start talking about you wanting to look at molecules and atoms, like you're well over $1 million in this range. right? Just a second.
Can you only use live specimens with the microscopes that use visible light?
Right field microscopy, compound microscopy using dark field or phase contrast is the only thing you're going to be able to do live organisms. You can do bright field, but you're probably not going to be able to see anything for, it's going to depend. It has to be really, really large. It'd be great if that organism naturally fluoresced or something like that. Right? You can get some protozoa and things like that that naturally fluoresce. And you probably have a little bit more luck there. The dark field and phase contrast is really what you're looking at for live organisms. All right, but you're not going to get that same level of resolution. Right, you don't get that contrast that you get from staining. It's really the staining procedures that are going to kill the organism. Anytime we're talking about staining, and even when we're talking about electron microscopy, we're talking about staining. That staining looks different. We're talking about staining with heavy metals and those sorts of things, but it's going to kill it. All right, transmission electrons, scanning electrons, transmission electrons. You're literally going to transmit those electrons through that object. Scanning electron. You're scanning over the surface, they're kind of refracting off the surface of that object. Right, so when those are passing through and those are being transmitted through, that's when the electrons scatter in the transmission electron microscope, right, 100 nanometers. We've got to do this on a vacuum. Denser that area is, the more that you're going to kind of scatter or change the flow of those electrons through it when they get transmitted through it. That's why you start using heavy metals for staining. Right? Again, light path the same. Here we're using an electron gun instead of a light bulb, but you're using a magnet instead of a glass lens, but you still have a condenser lens where you intensify that. You still have an objective lens. Right? Get this projector lens instead of an eyepiece, but right, it's still a compound system. So your eye, get a fluorescent screen that's going to pick up those electrons, right? Light path is the same. Okay. This is how big you guys thought it was going to look when you were doing your gram stain, isn't it?
Yeah. Maybe.
You guys looking at the lens. I see it. Microorganisms. Right. And again, they love putting like this extra large, right? This is bipolar bacilli. They love putting these like abnormally large ones in there because again, they're just about 1 micrometer big. But you can see this better in a textbook. That's why you keep seeing these like they select 4 images in the textbook where they're abnormally large just because it's easier to see detail. Like 1 micrometer big. Right. Again, able to see nucleoid now. See these little vesicles in here. So starting to be able to see that internal structure even in our microorganisms. Right, so usually for transmission electrons, you're taking sections, right? You're going to just take a slice of that organism. That's probably the most complicated part is taking those sections. Versus SEM, because you're just bouncing this off the surface, you don't have to do that section, right? You end up getting this 3D looking image because you're scattering them off of the surface. Right, so you can't see those internal structures. You can't see that whole organism. Again, light path, same electron gun. Right, this is essentially serving as your condenser. Right, magnet as your objective lenses. Right, you're just going to scatter these off the surface of that so they're transmitting it through, and they're going to bounce off and get detected. Okay, so this is what I mean by that 3D image. And now we're looking at whole organisms. Now this coloring is all artificial, right? Somebody's gone in there and done that. Can get controversial about going in with Photoshop and adding color to that. And at what extent is this image manipulation, right? If you had me for Gym Bio, I'd fuss at you if you tried to do the little pizza pie image. Instead of drawing in a whole field of view, because that's image manipulation. It's a real thing in 2018. We're concerned about image manipulation. Old people couldn't do it, but then younger people, they got into Photoshop and it started getting crazy. Some of the things they were doing to images. Right, so this, all this color, this you get this as a black and white image. This coloring has all been added. Like with that 3D effect, that's what you get from the scattering of those electrons off that surface. Right, so we can't see internal structure, but we can get this really good external view, right, for this structure. Right, now we're still abnormally large, but right, 2 micrometers, right, nowhere near as obscene as that previous one was, where they just found some really, really large. Right? Obviously, our facility. And you see this little artifact, that's kind of like this kind of wrinkle to it. That was kind of an effect of that staining process, right? You always get concerned about artifacts from staining. This is on top of the membrane, right? That's those little pores in there. Like a 0.2 micrometer pore. Can I skip this stuff?
Yes.
Okay. Alexander says no.
You use the word artifact. What exactly do you mean by that?
It's some things show up that are a result of the staining process. It's not what that actually looks like. Or so say we don't think that's what it's actually looked like. We think that as a result, you put this thing in a vacuum, or you used heavy metals to stain this thing, or you have to dehydrate it out. Right? So those are artifacts of that process, not what that organism truly looks like. We're going to skip all this principle of staining. I'll move that to lab, talk about all that stuff in lab. I already wrote the test. It's not in there. You guys remember gram stain. I may throw a gram stain question on there just as a gimme, right? But you guys remember gram stain, right? Most of you guys did gram stain if you were Thursday lab. You took a really, really, really long time to gram stain. Right, crystal violet is that primary stain. Right, rinse that. Iodine is remorted. Right, you're trying to set that dye. Right, the example I typically use is like your jeans. Right, stick them in a washing machine. You didn't wash all of that color right out of them. That's because remorted was used to set the dye. Right, so we're trying to set the dye in that peptidoglycan. It's there, we want it to stay there, not just rinse off. Right, our alcohol decolorizer. Because this is what happens, you stain everything with that crystal violet. It's just, it doesn't get retained when you decolorize. It gets stuck in that peptidoglycan, right? Well, that doesn't help us either. We got to use a counter stain. These are clear, and if this was gram-negative, right, we just see a bunch of clear things, and right, you may not see anything at all. So you have to use a counter stain. That's a random counter stain. Right, anytime you're using something just to add more contrast, just to differentiate it from your primary stain, the primary stain is always the thing that is giving you information about that structure, right? Crystal violet is the primary stain because it's actually sticking to the peptidoglycan, right? So granted, this is actually just going to stick to anything, but it's our counter stain because we're just trying to stain everything else present so that it looks different from our primary.
I wanted to, can you actually go back to the one? I wanted to ask you about the chemical and heat fixing, because I don't think it was in our handbook, and I was just curious about it. Yeah, there's a slide. So, we haven't actually used chemical fixation yet, have we? And are we going to? Is that
I'm
important?
not going to. There's some people that tell you with gram stain that there's a methanol fixation method that they think works better than a heat fixation method. And they're probably right, but nobody wants to do that method.
Okay, so it's
No,
not
I don't know
important
anybody who does that method. So there's like a few people out there saying that we should be doing that in fashion instead of the heat fix, but we got slide numbers now, so we're never changing.
then. They are very nice.
Ooh, you guys don't understand. It used to be 98 degrees in that lab with all the bunsen burners going on. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, that was it?
Yay!
Okay. Wait, we're still talking about taxonomy.
No.